This little papyri here is something I want you to know very well. I'm going to spend a few moments on it, so bear with me. It's called the Rylands fragment, and the number is P52. So everyone remember that. Memorize it. Rylands fragment P52. It's a fragment from the Gospel of John. It's that part of the Gospel of John where Pilate is judging Jesus, remember? And the Gabbatha, and he says, "What is truth?" Remember that? This is that passage. Based upon the writing style, paleographers, people who study ancient writings, place it at Hadrianic times during the Emperor Hadrian, which is early 2nd century. Okay, so we have a fragment of the Gospel of John from early 2nd century discovered in Egypt. Since the events that it's describing happened in Israel, then you have what they call a migration time for the story to go from Israel to Egypt, which is anywhere from 20 to 40 years. So that means with the migration time, this papyri could be late 1st century of the Gospel of John. When did John die?
80, 90.
Probably about 95 to 97 AD. If that's the case, then you have a papyri from the Gospel of John that may overlap the life of John himself. Okay? Is that significant, guys? This is very significant because there are many people out there. As a matter of fact, the general belief is among liberal scholars that the Gospels were written hundreds of years after the events in the 3rd and 4th century. And so if it's true that the Gospels were written hundreds of years after the events in the 3rd or 4th century, what in the world is this fragment of the Gospel of John doing at the beginning of the 2nd century or late 1st century? They need to deal with that. Oftentimes on the internet, when people are in this discussion, I'll just link them to the Rylands fragment. Oftentimes that ends the thread because it's very difficult to maintain that the Gospels were written in the 3rd and 4th century when you have an early 2nd century text from the Gospel of John. Because the Gospel of John is considered by almost all biblical scholars to be the latest of the Gospels. You've heard of the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke? People will debate about which came first, Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Is it Luke in priority or Mark in priority or whatever? You have that argument, but nobody believes that John has priority. Nobody believes that John came first. Everyone agrees John is the latest of the Gospels. So if you have a fragment from the Gospel of John in the early 2nd century, where does that put the other 3 Gospels? In the 1st century. So this little fragment puts all the Gospels within the life of the Gospel writers. Is that significant? Yes. So I want you to remember it. Rylands fragment, P52. P stands for papyri. So in the catalog of the Rylands collection, this is the 52nd papyri that he purchased. So there's text on both sides. This is the adverse and reverse side. This is the mention of truth, aletheia, in the Greek. Because it's so important, just let me read it to you, because I believe in the providence of God myself. I don't think this is an accident that it was discovered. It just seems strange to me it's just this one. If you take this one fragment and you could erase it from history, then the argument about it being written late would be a strong argument. And so God has preserved this small fragment for whatever reason. So I want to read the part that was preserved because I think that's instructive also. Then said Pilate to them, "Take him yourself and judge him by your own law." This fragment was found in the 1920s. You know what was happening in Europe and America in the 1920s? The modernist movement. And that's where the modern mind, the Enlightenment, had reached the popular level, and they're beginning to try to judge sacred texts, such as the Bible, using their own thoughts, their own rationality. So it's just fascinating to me that in the very passage is preserved is judge him by your own law. Because they're talking about Jesus, that they're judging by their own law. And the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put a man to death. This was to fulfill the word which Jesus had spoken, to show by what death he was to die. Pilate entered the praetorium again and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? And then on the other side, Pilate said to him, are you a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. For everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? It's just very interesting to me that in the 1920s, that's what they're struggling with. By their own rationality, what is truth? In the very text that's preserved is Pilate asking that very question to truth himself, what is truth? And it's interesting that the truth that you see here, the aletheia right there, that's been preserved, is not this truth. It's this truth. So it's not Pilate asking in general what is truth, but it's Jesus saying everyone who is of the truth hears my voice in terms of a lifestyle and knowing the truth. So at the very moment in time when culture is wrestling with that, this little papyrus shows up. And not only is it addressing the issues of the day, what is truth, but it places all the Gospels, which is about the life of the truth, of the capital T, in the first century. So you need to know about that text. And don't forget it.